Hello, welcome everybody. I'm Rachel Schofield. I'm delighted to be hosting today's Breaking Barriers LinkedIn Live, brought to you every month by Shape Talent. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Shape Talent's founder and CEO, Sharon Peake. Hi, Sharon. Great to have you with us.
Hello, nice to be here again, Rachel.
Thank you. We're going to be talking today about something that feels, I would say, increasingly urgent for HR and talent leaders right now. How do we strengthen the depth of leadership in organizations that are operating in constant change? The world, the workplace, they are noisy and uncertain and very fast moving places right now. And if I start with a question, if AI, for example, can generate analysis and information in seconds, what becomes the real premium, the most vital skill set in a leader inside an organization? Because to some extent, it's not intelligence anymore, it's judgment. And that shift is quietly redefining what leadership capabilities actually look like and what is needed to develop those. So today, Sharon and I, over the next 30 minutes or so, are going to explore what that means for HR and talent leaders and why accelerating future leaders equipped for the new workplace has become one of the most important priorities that organizations face right now. So we are delighted you're joining us. There'll be time for questions at the end, but do use the chat as we go. Tell us what's landing, drop questions in there as we go if you like, and then we can come to a short Q&A at the end. But we love people using the chat, so why not use it right now? Say hello, let us know where you're joining from. That would be a really welcome for Sharon and for me. So Sharon, let's get straight into this. So from where you sit, do we think that organizations are still potentially developing leaders for a world that doesn't really exist anymore?
It's a great question. Thank you, Rachel. And I think possibly yes, in some cases that is true, and for completely understandable reasons. So most of the development systems and infrastructure that we have in organizations was built for a type of leadership that is evolving. So the leadership competency frameworks, the leadership behavior models that we use that take a long time to develop were built in a very different context. In the last couple of years, we've seen such enormous advances in AI, and AI is shaping how leadership is done. And our models haven't always kept pace with that. So what we're seeing now, particularly with the advent of AI on leadership, is not just faster change, but it's a different kind of change. So work is continuously being reconfigured. Predictability in what you do and what your job is and how you do it is giving way to the need to be very agile and very, very adaptive as a leader. So let me give you some examples of that. How we make decisions are becoming increasingly more distributed, shaped by data, shaped by AI and intelligent systems. So I have a question in my mind as to what is the role of expertise in future. If you fast forward 3, 5, 10 years in a world where AI could be more expert than some of the leading world experts on different subjects, what is the role of expertise in organizations? So leaders aren't necessarily expected to be the expert anymore because you've got AI tools that can provide input and expertise, or at least complement your expertise, if not yet replace that. So leaders are having to make judgments, they're needing to interpret AI input, they're needing to combine that with their human judgment and experience. And they need to take accountability for the outcome of the decisions that they make. And we've got a name for this phenomenon, actually. One of our team, Dr. Priscilla Pereira, is writing a paper. We're going to launch it in June on the implications for leadership in an AI age. And she calls this concept the leadership leap. And so this is a shift away from leadership that's defined by control and predictability towards a type of leadership that is defined by systems thinking, that is defined by the need to be adaptable, the need for ethical judgment in interpreting the data available, and the need to be able to operate effectively in this hybrid world with humans and AI working in an ecosystem together. So, kind of in answer to your question, are we developing leaders for kind of a world that no longer exists? I think the challenge for organizations is that some of their models need to be updated to keep pace with that. And so the development that we need is going to need to adapt as well.
Yeah. Fascinating. And it leads really nicely into something that I'm often hearing from talent leaders around organizations naturally investing heavily in leadership programs. They want to get the best people and bring on the best people. But then when they look at their succession pipelines a year or so later, they find the dial hasn't moved very much. So why is that happening? Is this, I wonder, linked to the fact that the world's moving fast, but also that there are, things that perhaps they're not quite getting right in the first place?
Yeah, and sometimes we see this indeed when organizations call us in to kind of introduce a development program for them because what they've tried hasn't been working. And I think it's not always because what they were doing was poor. There's a couple of things that you need to do well in order to make sure you get the learning outcomes that you really need. Um, Development rarely fails because organizations aren't doing enough. Most of it comes down to kind of the system to support those interventions. So, for example, the organizations that do this well get a couple of things right. They're clear on who they're developing and why. So, who's it for? Is it for high potentials? Is it for early career individuals? Is it for people at a similar career level or in a similar function? Who's the audience? Who are you trying to develop? Is it for acceleration? Is it to retain, engage, and develop people in post, not to move up, but to stay in post? So be really clear on the development objectives. That is so important as a starting point. The other thing is targeting the real development needs. So we will do this if we're running, for example, a women's development program in an organization. We will start with a diagnostic to understand what are the barriers, what are the issues that need to be addressed in the learning interventions, so that you are targeting at source the things that are the real barriers or the real development gaps. So you need to be clear on who you're developing, why you're doing it, and what problems you're trying to solve. And then you need to get genuine buy-in from leaders. So there is an ecosystem that sits around this that's really important. So when we run programs, we will always involve two really important stakeholders: the line leader of the person on the program, because they've got a really important role to play in making sure that learning is embedded in the workplace. And we will also involve the HR and talent teams, because they too have a super important role in making sure that they are supporting the learning journey of these individuals. So get buy-in. And the other thing I would say is your programs need to be designed around real experiences. So not just content, not just theory, not, most organizations aren't just doing that, but make sure they're grounded in experiential learning on the job. It's the most powerful kind of learning. And then stop thinking about it in terms of an intervention or a training program. Start thinking about it as an ecosystem of lots of different interventions that you might mix and match together for individuals to get the learning outcome that you need.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Real strong pillars there that are going to be so important to get these kind of programs right. I want to now get into the specific interventions around developing people so that they have the skill sets for future leadership. And I know, by the way, actually, it's worth me mentioning at this point, we have created a free resource at Shape Talent. It's packed full of ideas on how HR and talent leaders can accelerate talent. So we're going to drop a link in the chat if that's something you would like. This will really kind of complement what Sharon and I are talking about today. So here, though, Sharon, I want to start with something that feels a bit less conventional than some other kind of ideas, which is using two things: executive advisory boards and chief of staff roles as deliberate development tools. Tell us more about that. What's the thinking here?
Yeah. Oh, I love these interventions. So if I take it back to this concept of the leadership leap, one of the biggest shifts in this move is away from managing within a system to understanding and operating across different systems. And the executive advisory board and the executive assistant, sometimes called more like a chief of staff role, do exactly that. So rather than trying to teach talent about strategy in a classroom, you're actually letting them see it happen in practice. So let's start with the exec advisory board. So this is a way of getting high potential, usually senior leaders together as a bit of a fly on the wall experience for them. So they get to get exposure to an executive committee, they get exposure to strategic decision making in real time, and they get to provide input into some of those decisions. So it builds their strategic insight and it also builds their profile and visibility in quite a high stakes way, I might add. So it's generally targeted at high potential leaders, typically mid management level. But I have also seen it, one of our clients does it at a much more junior level, and they do it very, very effectively. They do great progress. So think about what's the audience that you want to invest in. You generally need a small cohort of about 6 to 10. So, how it works is you bring this cohort into live strategic challenges, real problems that the business is facing. So, they might get a project to analyze a real live business program, a project, for example, a business problem. They recommend, or they make recommendations as to what the business might do to address that, and then they present that directly to senior leadership. So the executive committee have to engage with this, they have to take it seriously. I've seen other variations where the exec advisory board can act more as a shadow executive committee. So looking at the same challenges, coming up with their own recommendations and playing that back kind of throughout the year. But this experience where you operate at a high level, where you have your judgment tested in the room, as I said, in quite a high stakes way, kind of builds something that years of classroom development just can't build. So it builds contextual intelligence, which is really, really important. Now, the other element to this, or the other option, is what we refer to as executive assistant role. Sometimes that gets a bit confusing because an EA is also used as a kind of high level PA, personal assistant, and it is not that. It is more of a true assistant to a senior executive, so maybe more akin to a chief of staff kind of role. And again, this is about building contextual intelligence. So the exec assistant role is high profile, it's high impact. You assign an individual to a specific executive, normally on your executive committee. And that person gets to attend meetings. They get to, shadow the exec essentially, day to day, get exposure to the issues that are on their plate, get exposure to how those problems are addressed, the conversations that are had. So the individual gets proximity to an executive, which is really hard to do for someone who's not at that level. And they see how some of the politics unfold, how some of the trade-offs are made, how some of the decisions are made real time. And also they get exposure to working under pressure because again, it's high stakes, high profile. So they'll join the exec in meetings. They may even join the odd exco meeting, but certainly other meetings that the executive has. So once again, a bit like the exec advisory boards, you're testing someone under pressure. You're sharing how decisions evolve, how they're made, what the trade-offs are, what the politics are that need to be navigated. And so that combination of getting visibility of the system and getting the contextual judgment is such a powerful combination.
Yeah, I mean, just the idea that you're building these muscles in real time and not just theoretically is so powerful. Which leads us on to a second form of sort of intervention, which I think again probably gets overlooked and sometimes perhaps undervalued, which is ERG, employee resource groups. Being a leader of an ERG as a genuine development vehicle. It's something that I know you feel can work really well. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think this is one of the interventions that is frequently overlooked or missed in organizations. And it can be a great talent incubator. So, if we connect this once again to the concept of the leadership leap, how leadership is evolving in an AI age, ERG leadership builds a couple of really critical capabilities. It builds the ability to influence without formal authority, which is so critical as you move into leadership roles. And it builds the ability to navigate in complex systems. You're working from usually an executive level sponsor right through to the grassroots membership base and everyone in between. You've got pressures from different stakeholders. So you're really navigating quite complex systems, particularly in large organizations. That's what ERG leaders are doing every day. So To use this role as a talent incubator, I think is a fantastic, easy, no cost opportunity for organizations. So there's the opportunity here to develop leadership experience in high potential talent that may not yet be in a leadership role, or maybe are in a more junior leadership role. And it's an opportunity to amplify their leadership experience and skills. Now, as there's only usually a fairly small number of ERGs in most organizations, the number of opportunities is quite limited. So you want to be really selective in how you choose talent for these roles. And the opportunity here is to combine your talent identification processes, so your high potential identification, your succession identification, with the ERG selection process, so that the talent team is working together with the EDI, DEI team in the selection of the ERG leads. So you're giving those opportunities to the people who would benefit most from acceleration. So maybe these are future successes, future leadership successes to senior roles that you want to allocate it to. And there's a couple of things worth saying here. There's a few things that you do need to have in place for this to work. It doesn't work in every organization. You need a certain level of maturity of your systems and your processes for this to work. So you need, for example, really clearly defined roles and responsibilities in your ERG leadership team. So you need a job description, you need clarity of what the role is, what the job is about, what the boundaries are. Ideally, I would say this works where it's a job that's been done before. So where you've got an existing ERG, you've had previous chairs or leads. It's not the first time this role has existed. Second thing you need is really clear alignment between the talent and the EDI teams, so that you are aligning your high potentials and your successes with the recruitment process. You also need alignment between the EDI team and the ERG. So you need really good governance in terms of how the ERG supports the overall EDI strategy. And then finally, you need to make sure there is a connection between the talent team and the recruitment process. So you're getting the right people into those roles. But done well, this is a huge win-win. It's a win-win for the organization because you get to, advance your inclusion agenda, but it's a win-win for those talent who get opportunities to really accelerate their leadership skills. So I love this as an option.
Yeah. Really interesting. I feel like if I could see people who are watching, they ought to take notes here because this is really valuable suggestions. I'm going to move on to a third intervention that I know is very close to your heart, and I partly know because you were posting on LinkedIn about it just last week. I saw a video from you, but this is something that I know you feel works brilliantly, which is all about sponsorship. Why does sponsorship matter so well when we're thinking about future leaders? And I guess, what is a well-designed sponsorship program actually going to look like in practice?
Yeah, I do love sponsorship as an intervention. And in fact, sponsorship to me is critical. So there is some research that finds that men are more likely to have sponsorship than women in organizations. So sponsorship is something that happens naturally. It's a naturally occurring um, phenomenon where someone advocates on behalf of someone else. So in a talent review discussion or in a promotion discussion, there'll be someone in the room that says, actually, I think Max is great for this role. And here's all the reasons why. So that's a form of sponsorship. It's a form of raising someone's visibility. And it happens naturally for men, and it's partly to do with how we network. We tend to network with people that are more like us. So we have more men in leadership roles, and if men are networking with men, they're more likely to be sponsoring men. So it's not kind of deliberately done, but as a result of how we connect as human beings, sponsorship happens more naturally for men. So the same research has found, this is from the Center for Talent Innovation, that women are just as likely to be promoted as men if they have sponsorship, but they're less likely to have sponsorship. So I'm a big fan in sponsorship programs to really level the playing field. And so sponsorship, just to distinguish it from mentoring is where someone shares their expertise and advice with you. Sponsorship is where they use their power to help you, and not in a nepotistic way or in terms of any undue favoritism at all, but simply by talking about you in the right arenas with the right people, the corridors of power. So, sponsorship programs, we run these as standard in our women's development programs. Sponsorship programs are where you match a sponsor within the organization with a sponsoree, as we would call them. And there's a couple of things that really matter in doing this well. I've seen organizations run programs where it doesn't get the impact they need. To do it well, you need to do a couple of things. You need to make sure that your sponsors are really clear on what they're signing up for and that they want to do it. Not everyone wants to do this. Not everyone has a development mindset. Not everyone is good at developing others. So you've got to choose sponsors really, really wisely, and you've got to match them well. And so the matching process matters because if I work in finance and my aspiration is to be a group CFO, it's not always that helpful if I'm matched to a commercial sponsor or someone who's outside my functional area of expertise. So sponsorship, ideally, you want to match the aspirations, the career aspirations of the individual with the expertise and experience and power base of the sponsor. So matching really matters, the right disposition of the leader matters. And then you want to support both your sponsors and sponsorees. So when we run these programs, we will have check-in sessions for sponsors where they can come together. They can, in a private, safe space, they can share what's working for them, what challenges are coming up, and problem solve it together. Most sponsors have never been part of a formal sponsorship program, so they don't know what they don't know. And the other thing we do is we will support the sponsorees. Group coaching is a lovely way of doing this, but you can use other means where the sponsorees come together, share their experiences, and again, navigate through a system and support each other. So, when done well, sponsorship is incredibly powerful. And in fact, in our programs, it's one of the highest value added areas that participants rate at the end of a program. So, really, really worth doing for organizations.
Yeah, I was just on a call yesterday with a group of our participants and talking to them about their sponsors, and there was a lot of excitement and a lot of gratitude in the room for kind of what was happening in that relationship. So I'm totally with you on that. Intervention number 4. This is where we could do so many, but another key one before we kind of move on is around development plans. Now, people will say, well, everybody has a development plan, but you're talking here about what we call facilitated individual development plans. This is something a lot of people think they're doing, but they're not because the facilitated version is a bit different. Perhaps you can say more about what makes this really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on. So most big corporates will have an IDP, an individual development plan. Normally, not always, but often it's part of a performance management system or process where at least once a year you sit down with your manager, you talk about your development goals and things you can do to assist your development. In many cases, they are very administrative. They're completed during the performance reviews, they're generic. And in my experience, I've worked in talent management for over 15 years in big global organizations. In my experience, they very rarely translate into meaningful action. Individual ticks a box, the manager signs it off, and 3 months later, no one can remember what was agreed. So
It's in a drawer somewhere until it's got out a year later. Yeah.
and that you dust it off a year later. Oh, we were meant to do this. So, as you say, a facilitated individual development plan is very different, and we might call it a leadership development plan. It is facilitated by an expert coach who can help identify the right development actions for the individual to focus on. So, generally, this is quite a high touch, high impact intervention. And so generally you will reserve it for your high potential talent. So typically those who are on succession plan with maybe 1 to 2 years out from being ready for their next move. I've seen it done in organizations I've worked with. I've seen it done really well for senior level succession, so executive succession. But I've also rolled it out in organizations for much more junior talent, so kind of all the way down to early middle management level. We do usually a standard in the programs we run, whether they be women's development programs or broader talent acceleration programs. We usually incorporate this, and that could be anywhere from kind of early leadership roles right through to senior leadership roles. So let me bring it to life. What would you normally include in one of these very bespoke leadership development plans? We actually call them, we've got a program around this called Tailored to Lead. So in tailored to lead, you would start with some kind of diagnostic as to the learning needs. So you would probably do a 360 to get some feedback on how the individual is perceived in the workplace. You would often do some psychometric assessment to, again, identify kind of strengths and gaps. And then importantly, the coach would also do some kind of qualitative feedback interviews where if I was partnering on one of these tailored to lead plans, I would speak to maybe between 3 and 6 of the individual stakeholders. So maybe their line leader, maybe 1 or 2 of their direct reports, maybe a couple of their peers or customers, and really get verbally a feeling of how this person is perceived and what these individuals think the gaps are in their development. What's one thing they need to do most to progress? So you do a really clear diagnostic. Then you have a coaching conversation with the individual to kind of pull it all together, get their assessment of what the biggest development needs are. You have the same conversation with the line manager to get their perspective, and then you bring them together in a 3-way. And then the art is to narrow it down into the 2 or 3 most impactful development actions that person can take to get ahead. So not 10 things, and these should be experiential. They should be on the job. They shouldn't be a training course. So, for example, let me give you a couple of examples here. I worked with someone in Singapore who needed to develop her confidence at presenting to executive committee. So she was very nervous. She she hated doing these, and as a result, the exco kind of didn't see her as a leader because she kind of fumbled a lot. So rather than put her on a presentation course, what we did is we made sure that she did get some presentation coaching, but she then sat down with her direct manager before every exco presentation. They went through it. She practiced, she rehearsed, she got some feedback, she changed, she adapted. And she did that over and over the course of a year to the point where she was giving really impactful presentations. So it's about how you do that on the job. I've done something similar for leaders who need to develop their commercial capability. So how can they shadow someone? How can they be involved in the discussions? How can they meet more customers? How might they do a rotation somewhere in the business that gives them exposure, gives them more commercial responsibility? So this needs to be tailored to be effective, and it needs to be incredibly thoughtful in terms of how you can bring those experiences to life on the job. And if you get this right, this should be the roadmap to that next succession role. So what you're doing is you're identifying the development gaps that are the things that are getting in the way from that person being ready for that next succession step. So it's an incredibly powerful intervention when it's structured really well.
Love that. And I'm loving the emphasis in all of these interviews on the practical, the idea that people aren't going to learn to be great leaders and develop all these future ready skills by reading a book or sort of sitting on a webinar. That yes, there's a place for the theory, but it's got to be, experienced in real life. And how can organizations find ways to do that? Thank you. I've got one more question for you, Sharon, but just to tell people who are listening, this is your moment. If you have a question for Sharon, do get it in the chat. We'll go slightly over the 1/2 mark, but that's not a problem. And if you've got a question but you have to dash off, drop it in the chat anyway, because Sharon will certainly answer and follow up with anything that comes in the chat. But from me, Sharon, I guess I'd love to end just inviting you to share maybe one key takeaway. If HR and talent leaders are listening today, what should they really be thinking about and focused on if they want to future proof their leaders, get the right people coming through for this new world that we're living in?
Okay, so I'm going to be cheeky and I'm going to say 2 things. So first of
Allow,
all, I think I think HR leaders need to be thinking in terms of this leadership leap. So how is leadership evolving in an AI age? What are the different demands that are being placed on leaders? And what does that mean in terms of how we develop leaders in future? So that's the first thing. The second thing is I think we all need to be thinking of development and acceleration of our talent as a system and never a single intervention. So the more tailored, the more bespoke you can make those interventions, the better. I mean, any good L&D leader will know that no one single thing will ever address your acceleration needs. It's a system, it's a range of interventions that you need to make sure you're building the talent you need for the future.
Brilliant. I'm just diving into that. There's a very practical question and a very good question here from Rebecca. Can you remind me, please, what ERG stands for?
Employee resource groups. So not everyone will use that terminology, Rebecca. So some will call them employee networks. They technically mean slightly different things, different stages of evolution and maturity, but they might be called different things in your organization. The ERG is employee resource groups.
Yeah. So we always have to be careful when we are using all these phrases that people aren't like, oh, I can't quite remember. So great question. Thank you for asking for that clarification, Rebecca. Sharon, thank you so much. It's been brilliant talking to you. I know that you're always happy if people have further questions to follow up with them here on LinkedIn. If people just message you, people get involved in the chat, we will absolutely respond. And you can always, if you're thinking, I need help with this, then reaching out to Sharon to get on a call and think about leadership development pathways. It's our bread and butter, something we're passionate about, as I hope you can hear in this conversation. So please don't hesitate to get in touch. Otherwise, what do I need to tell you? Don't forget, you can download our Talent Acceleration Playbook. I mentioned it earlier. We've dropped it into the chat. That has 20 practical ways to accelerate talent, very much building on the discussion that Sharon and I have had today. We weren't able to go into all of them, but if you want them all, they're there for you, and we'd be delighted for you to download that resource. Coming up next month, Shape Talent have partnered with Lead Network. We're creating a joint research study. We've been exploring women's career progression across the retail and CPG, consumer packaged goods industry. We are having a live release on Wednesday, the 29th of April at 2:00 UK time. Again, if you look in the chat, we're going to drop the link in. If you want to register for that webinar to hear about what we have uncovered together is that in that piece of research, then we would be delighted to welcome you into that. And finally, for our LinkedIn Live Breaking Barriers next month on Thursday, the 7th of May, that is the date for your diary. I will be joined by Kevin Furby. Kevin is the co-chair of Specsavers Menopause Colleague Network Group. That's another, there we are, a colleague network group. That's another ERG. And Kevin and I will be discussing how Specsavers have built meaningful support for their colleagues experiencing menopause. Sure to be a really great conversation. Do look out on LinkedIn for that in the coming days. We'll be letting you know about the timings and how you can register and join us. We always love for you to be with us every month for Breaking Barriers. But for now, we say cheerio, have a great day. And Sharon, thanks so much for your time. Thanks. Bye-bye.